endless matches, thinking about endless moves, endless beginnings, endless end games, endless middle moves. And really, it was through doing the 10,000 hours, putting the time in and doing the hard yards. And if you want students to get good, if you want to sound like other fluent speakers of English, you need to hear all of those other fluent speakers of English. When you see those adverts telling you, you know, elementary to advanced in 3 weeks, they're rubbish. I mean, it's bullshit. They're selling you a kind of pig in a poke, basically. Things aren't easy and things take time, even though we want simplicity. Okay? So, how do you get better at judging frequency? I think it's something that all of us, native, non-native, experienced, inexperienced teachers, need to get better at doing. Well, one thing you can do is if you go to macmillandictionary.com, in the Macmillan Dictionary, they have a star rating system: 3-star words, 2-star words, and 1-star words. 3-star words are the 2,500 most common words in the language. 2-star, 2,500 to 5,000 most common words. 1-star, 5,000 to 7,500 most common words. Those are the words really that you want to be learning up to first certificate advanced, okay? Let's say up to Cambridge advanced. Most of what you learn should be in those 1, 2, or 3-star words. And the red word game helps you to work this out. So it will give you a word like serious, and it will ask you, is it a 1-star word, a 2-star word, or a 3-star word? And maybe you say, oh, not very common. 1-star. Oh, it's a 3-star word. Why? You then look at the examples and you see things like, it was a serious problem, it's a serious issue, it's something we need to be serious about, we need to have a serious talk, we need to have a serious look at. And you realize, it's not just about people being very serious. You look at arise, you know, we'll deal with that if and when it arises. Sorry, I'm going to be late home, a problem's arisen at work. Yeah. So it gives you examples in the dictionary that help you think, oh yeah, that word's actually much more common than I realized, or less common than I realized. So, you know, hard working, well, you look at the examples and there's probably one example and it's probably not even a 1, 2, or 3-star word. You can also use Google. You probably know if you put things in speech marks like this, you can check which one is more common. Okay, so if you want to find out, like, you know, snow, after the snow is there, which one's more common? Well, if you enter into Google like this, the snow started to melt, the snow started to thaw. Okay, both of those are possible. Lots of things are possible. You can tell from the number of hits in Google, wow, that one's 5 times more common than the other one. That's the one I should think about. That's the one I should teach. If you're lucky, you might also have language nerd teacher friends who you can discuss these things with. You know, you can ask them, which one do you think is more common? Which one's worth spending time on? Which one would you teach at this level? Okay. So, you know, there are things we can do to train ourselves to get better at frequency. In terms of giving good examples, I think the way to think about it is like this. For me, when I'm going through a vocab exercise, okay, so let's say I'm teaching an intermediate level class and there's an exercise in the course book looking at adjectives to describe personality, okay, and one of those adjectives is ambitious. What I then start thinking about is, well, when I'm going through the answers, obviously I want to check, do they know the answer to number 1 is ambitious? So it might be something like, you know, she's obsessed with climbing the career ladder. She's very ... Or, you know, she's always wanted to do well in her career. She's very ... So I'm looking at that thinking, when I'm checking the answers, I want to make sure, first, they know ambitious. Yeah, So if you're an ambitious person, you want to do well in your job, you want to climb the career ladder, you want to get ahead in your career. I'm also thinking, yeah, then I might want to give one more collocation or one more use of the word ambitious. So I'm not just giving the answers to the exercise, but I'm using the time that I'm checking the answers as an opportunity to add to students' understanding of how the word works. So one thing you could do is you could look up the word ambitious in a good dictionary, okay? Macmillan Dictionary or the Oxford Dictionary or the Cambridge Dictionary or the Collins Dictionary. They're all free. They're all available online. When you look it up, because it's an adjective, you need to be looking for which adverbs go with that adjective, which nouns does this adjective describe. And what you find is this. Well, there's loads. You can be extremely ambitious, hugely ambitious, overly ambitious, too ambitious, wildly ambitious, ruthlessly ambitious. Something can be artistically ambitious, politically ambitious, socially ambitious. Ambitious attempt, ambitious plan, program, proposal, venture, aim, goal, target. Well, you can't teach all of that at once, okay? Those collocations have to be learned over time, through experience, through exposure. So what I might do is to think, okay, at this level, I reckon they probably don't know overly ambitious. So let's take that collocation, overly ambitious. What I then do is I start thinking about, well, that's the collocation. What are the collocations of that collocation? What, overly ambitious, what? Okay, what would I describe as overly ambitious? What's the conversation? Who am I talking to? Why am I using this collocation? And what you then get is you move from a collocation to a story, which I might tell, to an example that I might write on the board. So what I might do is to say something like, yeah, so number one, she's always wanted to do well in her career. She's very ambitious. Yeah, good. You can also be overly ambitious. Okay, so for example, hey, how did the webinar go? Oh, I was overly ambitious as usual. I didn't do half of what I'd planned. How did your lesson go? Oh, it was okay, but I was overly ambitious. I ran out of time. I didn't finish. If the word that I'm looking for in number 3 is criticism, I might say, yeah, okay, so in number 3, yeah, he's faced a lot of criticism. You can also face criticism about your leadership. For example, our glorious idiot overlord here in the UK, Boris Johnson. Has faced a lot of criticism because he's seen as arrogant and incompetent. And you might give that whole sentence on the board as you're checking the answers and going through things. So what you're doing here is you're using the time when you're checking the answers as a chance to add to and layer students' understanding of how words work, how they collocate, how they're used in normal, everyday kind of conversations. I think what it also means is when you're giving examples of these words, or any other words, in fact, excuse me, you need to be stopping and thinking, well, when would I use this word? Why would I use it? Who am I talking to? What's the context? What's the sentence? And when you start doing that, you start getting, he reminds you of Toad. Yeah, he reminds me of Damien in The Omen, but there you go. When you do this, you start getting examples that are much more interesting than he has a beard, she is Muslim, he is a paramedic. Okay, so for example, you get things like this. Hey, who was the guy with the beard? I haven't seen him before. I teach a lot of Muslim students. I have taught over the years a lot of Muslim students, and I know a lot of them get fed up with the way they're represented in the media. So I might write as an example, as a Muslim, I believe we have the responsibility to help others. Paramedic. Why am I talking about paramedic? I guess it's a story about calling an ambulance. Oh, I know. When I was 16, I found a guy overdosing from heroin in a telephone box, and I called the ambulance. And when the paramedics arrived, his heart had stopped beating, but they got it going again and they rushed him to hospital. Whereby? I can't think of any example of whereby. I'm going to cheat and look online. What's a good... Immunization is the process whereby a person is made immune or resistant to an infectious disease, typically by the administration of a vaccine. That's a very topical example at the moment. If you're thinking, why couldn't I think of a good example of whereby earlier? Well, there's the reason why you can't, because it's used in complicated, quite academic, kind of quite written sorts of ways, okay? So once you start thinking like this, you think, well, those are really good examples. I can imagine people saying those. I can imagine the context in which these things might come up. These are much better examples, even though they're longer examples. And once you've got your longer examples, you can go from the examples to encouraging noticing in the students, okay? So what you might do is you might say things like, who was the guy with the beard? I haven't seen him before. Yeah, what tense is it here? I haven't seen him before. Yeah, present perfect. Good. Why? Yeah, before now. From the past to now. Good. Just checking. Yeah, in number 3, when the paramedics arrived, his heart had stopped beating. Why had stopped, not stopped before? Yeah, so before they arrived. So past, more past. Before they arrived, his heart already had stopped beating. And in the next one, immunization is the process whereby a person is made immune. Why is made? Talking of vaccines. Why is made, not made? Okay, yeah, it's passive, okay? The person is made immune. By what? By the administration of the vaccine. Good, okay, just checking. So you can use the longer examples of vocabulary as a way of keeping the grammar moving in students' heads, keeping them alert to grammar and thinking about grammar. Yeah, these kind of questions that you've just heard me ask, okay? And the answers I expect are simple. You know, why haven't seen him before? From the past to now. Good. Okay. Why had stopped beating? Past, more past. Fine. Passive. Fine. I don't want a 10-minute explanation. I just want to see that there's a basic conceptual understanding here. What you can also do when you have longer examples is move from the examples to a different kind of noticing. You can move to helping students notice patterns, chunks, and vocabulary. And I'll show you some examples in a minute. Excuse me. It's a big cup. It takes a long time to drink. It's like a cup as big as my head. So what you might do is to say, yeah, so who was the guy with the beard? I haven't seen him before. What else could you say here? Who was the guy with... And then you get ideas from the group, okay? So, you know, who was the guy with the glasses? I haven't seen him before. Who was the guy with the scar? I haven't seen him before. You know, who was the guy with... When you create space here, you get weird answers sometimes from students. You know, students say things like glass eye. And you go, right, okay. Who was the guy with the glass eye? I haven't seen him before. Anything else? Who was the guy with the blonde? Yeah, okay. I haven't seen him before. Who was the guy with the wooden leg? Okay, you've been watching too many pirate movies. Yeah, I haven't seen him before. As a, I believe. You know, as a Pole, I believe, blah, 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 blah. As a teacher, I believe, blah, 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 blah. As a white person, I believe, blah, 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 blah. As a Londoner, I believe, blah, 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 blah. As a man, I believe blah, 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 blah. As a woman, I believe blah, 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 blah. And again, you can get ideas from the students there, okay? Let them kind of fill those gaps. Anything else that might happen when the paramedics arrived? Yeah, so his heart stopped. They got it going again. What else can you get going apart from people's hearts? Yeah, so you can get a car going again. You can get the office photocopier going again, much to the relief of teachers. They rushed him to hospital. Where else can you rush people to? Rush him to the airport because you're worried he might miss his flight. Rush the kids to school because you're running late. Yeah, so immunization is the process whereby what about photosynthesis? It's the process whereby plants convert sunlight into energy. I think, maybe you know better than me. Okay. How did the workshop go? How did the webinar go? What else can go in this gap? How did your meeting go? Okay. How did your interview go? Yeah. How did your lesson go? How did your date go? Okay. You can run out of time. Anything else you can run out of? Oh my God, I've run out of tea bags. You run out of coffee. You run out of sugar. You run out of money before the end of the month. Leaders can face a lot of criticism about their leadership. People can be seen as being arrogant and incompetent. Any other ways that famous public figures are seen as or are seen as being? Get ideas from the group again. So what you're then doing is creating this space where the students can throw their own ideas at you and you can work with those ideas, filter them, reject some of them, rephrase some of them, and add some of those examples to what you have on the board, which layers and develops students' understanding of how those words work. What you can then do is you can ask questions which both check understanding of the language you're looking at and also generate connected language. So you might ask, why might someone face a lot of criticism? Maybe they make an unpopular decision. So if the boss or a local government person or the president, makes an unpopular decision, they face a lot of criticism. Maybe if you're a celebrity, you say something stupid and you face a lot of criticism. So, it's happened, for example, to J.K. Rowling over here because of her comments about trans people. How might you feel if you run out of time in an exam? Well, gutted, really pissed off, really annoyed at yourself, really fed up. What might you say if someone asks, hey, how did the interview go? Really well. They offered me the job on the spot. Oh, don't ask. It was a disaster. I messed it up. What happens if a person is ruthlessly ambitious? They'll stop at nothing. They'll do anything to get to the top. They'd stab you in the back if they thought it would advance their career prospects. They'd sell their grandmother if they thought it would help them climb the career ladder. What's the opposite of a highly infectious disease? I got asked this in class this week, which is why it's on my mind. I'm not sure what the answer is. I guess it's not very infectious would be the opposite of that. Okay. What verbs go with beard? Well, you can grow a beard. You can shave your beard off. Maybe you can trim your beard. If you've got one of those hipster beards, you can kind of wax your beard. I asked this in class once, and one of my students said, pick food out of. It's like, oh, seriously? I said, yeah, my husband has a big beard. And sometimes when he's late for work, he eats his breakfast in a hurry. And when I kiss him goodbye at the doorstep, I have to pick little bits of food out of his beard so he doesn't embarrass himself in the office. So, thank you for sharing. What else might paramedics often do? And when you ask these kinds of questions, you're basically kind of creating different sorts of lexical sets. Okay, they're not lexical sets as in 8 adjectives for describing personality or 8 nouns for describing people. What you're getting is words connected to facing criticism or being ruthlessly ambitious or being a paramedic or how interviews go. So you're kind of looking at the language for telling little stories around these chunks of language that you're exploring. Yeah, you're exploring the networks, the webs of words that create these kind of alternative lexical sets, if you like. I think there are real problems with traditional lexical sets. Mm. When you look in most course books, not the ones that I've written, which I should just give a cheap commercial plug to, by the way, the Outcomes series. When you look at traditional lexical sets and you get things like, 8 parts of the body or 8 vehicles or 8 adjectives for describing personality or 8 items of clothing. Well, the problem with this kind of thing is some of those words will be quite frequent, like serious or fun. Some of them, like hardworking, will be basically useless. Okay. Um, when you've got words like, I don't know, truck, car, bicycle, ferry, van. Well, some of those words are quite high frequency. Some of them, like ferry, much less frequent. And what do you do with those words? I mean, once you've learned them, apart from being able to point at things and say, oh, look, ferry, oh, truck, how can you turn them into communicative use? So I think often studying vocabulary in topics like that, in those kind of lexical sets, and often, you find it online all the time. Here are 20 things in a house. Label the picture. Sofa, microwave, carpet, curtain. Once you're doing this, I mean, again, what do you think students are going to talk about with this language? All they can do is come to your house and say, "Oh, carpet." Okay, I mean, it's a bit weird. We're training them to be human naming machines. But actually, I think this way of learning is less useful and less efficient than learning stories around words. When you've got these kind of hyponymous sets, as I said, they may be less easy to turn to usage and turn to conversation. I think also we need to recognize the way that we organize things is not how we acquire them. You think of your own first language. If I asked you in your first language, can you write down 20 fruits? Of course you can, okay? That's not because when you were a child, your parents or your teachers sat you down and forced you to learn lists of fruit. Probably what happened is you learned apple or orange quite early because your mum said, do you want an apple? Here, have an orange, have a bit of orange. Maybe when you got older, you learned things like mango because your mum said or your dad said, hey, do you want to try a piece of this? What is it? It's called mango. Okay, it's new. Maybe when you go on holiday, you try new things like, what's that crazy smell? Oh, that's durian. What's durian? Oh, it's a common fruit here in Thailand. Look, it's one of those. So you learn them in different contexts through conversations, but you store them as, 20 fruits or 10 things which smell disgusting or 5 things I love eating for breakfast. You store them in different kinds of ways. And the brain organizes language in all kinds of different networks. So you might have the word paramedic in stories I sometimes tell about weird things that happened to me when I was a teenager, things that members of my family do for a job, okay? Things that I've seen happen while I'm driving. You might have all these different networks or stories or conversations, all of which include the word paramedic. And when you're kind of texting that word, when you're creating a spoken or a written text around a word like paramedic or overly ambitious or face criticism, you're kind of creating different networks of language around those words rather than categorizing them and putting it in a group. I think also collocations and groups of words have different networks to single words. So even if you think about something really simple like old car, new car, the things you say about old car are completely different to the things you say about new car. So you might say things like, "You still driving this old car? I finally managed to sell my old car. I'd love to get rid of my new car, of my old car. I wish I could afford a new car, but I can't. I'm only a teacher. I managed to trade in my old car and get a new one. Ooh, new car, very nice." Okay? And, they may be as easy to learn as single words are. Groups of words are no more difficult. They're just, things you have to remember that have meanings. So, a few final thoughts before I throw it over to everyone for some questions. I think 3 big points to take away from what I've been talking about is just accepting that recognizing what's frequent and what's useful isn't something we're born with. Okay, in whatever language you're teaching, whether you're teaching your first language, your second language, your third language, it's difficult to know what's frequent and therefore what's useful. It's something we need to train ourselves to do. And when we're teaching, we need to be focusing more on frequent language than less frequent language, okay? Because that's the language that students are more likely to meet and to use. Giving good examples is also difficult. I mean, when I look back at my early teaching and think of some of the horrific things I wrote on the board, the nonsense I wrote on the board, I mean, it's I want to take my younger self to one side and give myself a hard slap round the face. But it's difficult. Because a lot of things, if you want to show how they actually work, like whereby, well, showing how whereby works cannot be done simply. It requires a complex sentence, okay? Even beard. I mean, you think about most things you might say about a beard. Are you growing a beard? No, I just haven't shaved for a few days. What happened to the beard? Oh, I shaved it off. I got sick of it. Even simple things that you say about beards require quite complex sentences. Yeah. What all this means, I think, is we can't expect to be great at doing this spontaneously. This has to be part of the way in which we plan when we're planning lessons. When I'm working with teachers and we're talking about lesson planning, for me, what I want to see is, okay, show me the language you're teaching today. When you're going through that exercise, what words are you going to spend more time on? What words are you going to spend less time on? What extra examples of usage are you going to give? How are you going to explain those extra examples? What questions are you going to ask about the extra examples that you give? How are you going to involve the students? What aspect of your extra examples are you going to get students to notice? And I think building in this kind of thinking about the language you're going to be teaching, what you're going to say about it, what examples of it you're going to give, and how you're going to involve the students in the creation and extension of those examples has to be something you build into your planning time. I mean, for me now, I can do this very quickly. This morning, I had 3 lessons with a half an hour break between each one. And I know what pages I'm doing. And I mean, literally, I'll pick up the book 6, 7 minutes before class and I'll look at it and I'll think, okay, that exercise, Yeah, that bit of language, that bit of language, that bit of language. This is the example I'm going to give. I'm going to ask these questions. This is where that might go. So after 27 years of teaching, God, after 27 years, where did my life go? After 27 years of teaching, that's something I can now do on the hoof. But I still spend time before class thinking about it for a few minutes, even with books I've written myself and lessons I've taught hundreds of times before. I need to just build time in to plan and think about it. Some final tips. As I said, I think what this means is when you're planning your lesson, don't just think about the activities, think about the language and what you're going to do with that language. Don't just plan to complete your aims as you're taught to do on CELTAs or DELTAs or teacher training courses. Allow some space for the students. If you've got a 1 hour lesson, plan 50 minutes and leave 10 minutes for the unexpected, for the students to provide ideas, for you to say, pick food out of why would you, oh, seriously, this is what happens. Tell your husband to shave his beard off. Seriously, do you have a photo? My God, that is a big beard. Okay, and you like a man with a beard, do you? Okay, well, okay, each to their own. Yeah, allow a bit of space built in for this to happen, because that's the fun, that's the magic, that's the kind of wonder of the classroom. Think about what students might say when they're doing speaking tasks. So if you've got a speaking section in the course book or in the material that you're using, think yourself about, well, if I was answering those questions, here are some things I might say. I might teach this before or after the students do their bit of speaking. You might sometimes want to write little dialogues. So if you're teaching words like, I don't know, if you have to teach carpet, kettle, microwave, well, have a think about when might students use these words? What might they say? Can I write a little exercise showing these words in little dialogues? I've had a terrible day. Oh, let me just put the on and you can tell me all about it. Well, is that microwave, kettle, curtain, or carpet? Well done. It's kettle. Okay. Hey, can you draw the I don't want the neighbours looking in. Okay, that'll be curtains. Well done. So by thinking about what are you doing with the words that you're teaching, this helps you to kind of brainstorm the language around those words, and it helps you begin to start writing your own material, which can supplement and complement the material in the course book you're using. Other things you can do, and Tatjana, I'll come to your question in a minute, yeah? With your colleagues, just discuss interesting errors you came across, okay? It might be because of L1 interference. So, if you're teaching people who share the same first language as you, you'll become very familiar with common mistakes that they make. For me, I can see certain mistakes and I can tell you the first language of the person who wrote those sentences. So if I see something like, I was stolen my mobile, I know that's a Japanese speaker. And I know what they mean is someone stole my mobile. I had my mobile stolen. If I see, I feel myself well, I know that's probably a Russian speaker, definitely a speaker of a Slavic language. If I see, I make appointment, my girlfriend, almost certainly Spanish or Italian. Okay, there are certain kinds of errors that are typical. Sometimes you see errors and you think, I don't understand why they've made this mistake and I don't understand what it means. What do you think? Yes, you're right. Thank you for helping me see something that I couldn't see myself. Also, discuss interesting questions that you're asked in class. Share them with colleagues. Together you can get better at answering questions. It might just be you're asked things like, so Hugh, what's the difference between oily and greasy? Oh, that's quite a a tricky question, actually. What did you tell them? Well, this is what I said. What would you have said? Yeah, today in class, I got asked, what's the difference between repercussion, implication, and consequence? Ooh, killer question. How did you answer that? I told them I'd look it up and come back next day. What would you have said? Let's look in the dictionary and check. You know, those are really positive, kind of inquisitive questions to keep in mind. And sometimes you'll be lying there watching Netflix on a Sunday evening with a bottle of wine in your hand, and suddenly you'll hear a sentence and you'll think, that's what the student asked me about last Tuesday. What a brilliant example. I'll bring that into my next class. Discuss new language that you'd never taught or never thought about teaching until it came up in class. I mean, for me, if I don't teach at least one thing every day that I've never taught before, I'm doing something wrong, okay? Because there must be something that students try to say where I think, yeah, I know what you mean. Earlier this afternoon, I found myself teaching for the first time ever, scratch and sniff, because one of my students was talking about these books that you can buy for kids where they have these little pictures and you scratch them and you can smell them and they smell like bananas or strawberries or something. I mean, yeah, I remember those from when my kids were very young. I don't think I've ever taught the word, do you remember those scratch and sniff books we used to get when we were kids? Okay, but that came up in my class because a student wanted to say it. That's great to know. Share that with your colleagues. And finally, maybe discuss what you learned about your students. Because if you've had an hour lesson with students and you didn't learn anything new about your students, you're doing something wrong. You know, every lesson, you should be giving them enough space for you to learn something about them, for you to just get a little bit of a better idea about who they are, what they believe, what's happened to them. Today I learned that one of my students fell victim to a scam where she was driving and a car was blocking the road in front of her. She got out. The guy told her she had a problem with her tire. While she was looking at the tire, someone got out of the other side of the car, got into her car, stole her phone and her bag. Okay, so, you know, she fell prey to the scammers. She was scammed. They fleeced her. And I didn't know that, and I hadn't heard that story before, or even that scam before. After class, I Googled it, and there are hundreds of people talking about this scam in different countries. So, you know, that was all very interesting. So I think all of these things we need to be sharing, discussing, talking about with our colleagues, talking about in our kind of, you know, PLN, our little personal learning network. These are also things I like sharing on social media. So to finish off, I should just tell you, I run a website called lexicallab.com. We are also an online language school. We specialize in advanced and proficiency level spoken language classes, particularly for non-native speaker teachers of English, but also just kind of CAE, CPE level students who want to brush up and improve their spoken English. Also on the Lexical Lab site, we offer online teacher development courses now. And we also run a London-based summer school. So please do check out what we do. If you're on Facebook, it's facebook.com Lexical Lab Limited. Please find us and like us. We're also Lexical Lab on Instagram, if any of you use Instagram. And if any of you want a copy of the PowerPoint, or you have any questions or anything, or any concerns, please feel free to email me. It's hugh@lexicallab.com. So I think what I'll do now is just see if there are any questions that come up, try and deal with things that you're asking about. So I see Tetiana, what are the effective ways to put new vocab into practice? So I think maybe the most effective way is to think of a good example and to ask the kinds of questions I was talking about earlier, and to allow students the space to add their own ideas. Okay, so it might just be something like, it took me a long time to come to terms with the fact we got made redundant. What else might take you a long what other things might it take you a long time to come to terms with? Yeah, so maybe it took you a long time to come to terms with your divorce. It takes you a long time to come to terms with the fact that you're never going to play football for your local football team. I still haven't quite accepted this myself. Maybe it takes you a long time to come to terms with, the death of a loved one. Creating that kind of space. I think then what you do is you revise that next lesson. You might ask, can you think of 3 things it takes you time to come to terms with? Can you think of something that took you a long time to come to terms with? Or maybe you just have a gap fill that's like, number 1, it took me ages to come to with, you know, my first wife leaving me for my best friend. Whatever you kind of want to put in your examples. And I think that's how you put the language into practice, through personalizing it, through using students' ideas to expand upon the examples, and by revising it. How do you teach them to use vocab as adjective, noun, or verb? By showing them examples. Okay. To be honest, I very rarely even bother asking them, is it a verb or an adjective or a noun? I just give them the examples and show them. So, if you're teaching that thing about ambitious and you're saying, how did the workshop go? I was overly ambitious. I ran out of time. I was overly ambitious. I didn't do half of what I'd planned to do. Well, that's teaching them how to use ambitious as an adjective. Okay. Through the examples. How to make them use more adverbs? Through the examples, and through experience and through exposure. I mean, to be honest, a lot of the time you won't use that many adverbs in everyday speech. Okay. So, I mean, fast, quickly, slowly. I bet there's about 10 adverbs you use regularly in everyday speech. After that, it's just showing examples of them in more written language as they come up. So maybe you see some examples in a reading text you're doing, and you give extra examples yourself, maybe based on what you've looked up in a dictionary beforehand. In written works as well as speech. Yeah, I mean, in written works, through teaching them in context as they come up, and giving examples and explaining. Yeah, so you can do this. I don't know. Give me a proper adverb. I don't know. Repentantly. You can say something repentantly. Anything else you might do repentantly? No, not much. Okay, well, here's an example. Yeah. Any tips for teaching vocab at lower levels? Same principle. I mean, it's the same principle. Basically, you want to start with a very basic meaning, okay? But then you need an example. So it might be, I don't know, say you are learning parts of the body, okay? Fine, you label the part of the body and you say head, arm, leg. Well, what are you going to say about those things? So it might just be something really simple like, are you okay? No, I've cut my arm. No, I've hurt my leg. No, I banged my head. And you just give a few examples like that. Yeah. Students are getting lists. Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I know. And I think that's a real problem with vocab lists, where there's not enough thought or attention paid to how that vocab is activated and how that vocab is used in everyday speech or everyday writing. Teaching lexically, not yet, but the 2 courses we have online are obviously influenced by the ideas from teaching lexically. So have a look at what we've got in the online teacher development courses. What books would I recommend to practice vocab at the C1 level? Well, I would recommend Outcomes Advanced. If you're looking for self-study books, I think the best book at that level is probably English Vocabulary Organizer by Chris Goff. And I think Idioms Organizer by John Wright is also really, really good. Okay, if anyone does have any more questions or anything else you want to ask, do feel free to drop me an email, as I said. I'm always very happy to hear from people, and I will get back to you at some point. Okay, there you go. It's Hugh at Lexical Lab. You're welcome. And as I said, please do check out the website and check out what we have on offer there. No, that's not right.
Hugh?
Yes.
We've got a couple of questions from the Facebook stream.
Oh, okay.
Among those, Andy Cowell's interesting idea about how it should affect the government or generally the philosophy of teaching.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think it's a tricky question because those exams are different from country to country, and exams, national exams, aren't set in stone. Okay, they change over time, and they change over time because of pressure from teachers. And the young teachers of today, in whichever country you're out there, you're going to be the exam board writers and, you know, focus groups and drivers of the future. So if you're not happy with the state exams that you've got at the moment, let it be known, and, you know, make your voices heard. And if you're thinking about being ambitious and getting ahead in your career, you could do a lot worse than try to get involved in, you know, helping to be the next generation of national exam board writers. So I think it's just believing in the possibility of change and thinking about how you can contribute to that change yourself in some positive way. So what if students don't want to brainstorm? For example, a question like, what else can you run out of? Well, if they say, I don't know, that means they don't know that word, okay? And you just give them, you say, so you can run out of time. Anything else you can run out of? No? No one got any ideas? You can also run out of coffee, okay? Every teacher's nightmare. You wake up in the morning and you think, oh my God, no coffee in the house. What am I going to do? I've run out of coffee. Anything else? Give them one, throw it over, see if they come up with another idea. If they're still sitting there saying, I've no idea, you then just say, right, you can also run out of money. So maybe some of you, you know that horrible feeling. It's 5 days to go until you get paid. You check how much money you've got in the bank. Oh, nothing. You know, you have to live on bread and water until payday. You just give them a couple more examples and you give them little stories around those examples. Next lesson, you do a revision activity where one of the questions is, say 3 things you can run out of. And you just check that they can remember. You know, for me, the only reason they will say, I don't know, is if they don't know. And if they don't know, well, help them. Give them one, see if they can think of any more. Give them another one, move on, test it and recycle it later. Meaning, make a little bit of linguistic research for each lesson. Yes, absolutely, Sophia. For me, I think when I'm preparing, okay, whatever lesson I'm preparing, I'm still thinking about how am I going to explain that word? What examples am I going to give? What questions am I going to ask about it? And I mean, that happens every single lesson that I'm teaching. So, I mean, I'm just looking at something here, okay? I had a thing earlier I was teaching about what's the advantages of having sites that are completely encrypted. And I wrote that question based on something I taught in a previous lesson about encryption on social media sites. I then looked at it and thought, do you know what? I'm not completely sure I can explain what encrypted means. I'm just going to have a quick look at the dictionary. I'm going to make sure I understand the process by which encryption works. As it happened, somebody asked me, can you explain again about encrypted websites? And I was like, oh, I'm glad you've asked. Students look at you like, how do you know all of this? Trust me, it's not because I'm a native speaker. It's because I looked it up beforehand and I had to think about it. Yeah, it might mean I don't know, sometimes means I don't care. You're right. At the same time, I mean, what are your alternatives? Okay. So I think with all teaching, you have to always be asking yourself, if not this, then what else? So if you're not asking questions about the vocabulary, what are you doing with the vocabulary? Presumably, you're just saying you can also run out of coffee and money. Okay, there you go. There's your examples. Or you don't teach it at all. So those are your alternatives. Of the three, I know which one I think is better. And in a way, sometimes I think what it is when you ask those questions like, you know, anything else you can be kicked out of, any other reasons why maybe people pass out, anything else it takes time to come to terms with. When students get used to the fact that this is what you do as a teacher, at some point, one of those I don't care people might sort of go, yeah, you can get kicked out of a nightclub. You go, oh, yeah, you can. Why? And they give you a funny example from their own life. Okay. You can guarantee that won't happen if you don't ask the question. So, you know, if you don't want student involvement and you don't want the possibility of students interacting with the language, that's easy. You just don't ask questions. And then you don't have that problem. You have a different set of problems, which is there's no student involvement with the language because you're not trying to facilitate that. So it's always about thinking what your alternatives are. And thank you very much for the kind words about outcomes. Thank you. So I think that's us done for the night.
Yeah. Hugh, it's been a pleasure to listen to you, and to my mind, it's a bit of a teaching lexically in a nutshell, right?
It's like the Redux version.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot. Thanks
You're
a lot.
welcome. Thank you
Great.
for inviting me, and look forward to doing some more work with Poland IATEFL next year.
See you soon.
All right. Take care, everyone. Bye. Take care, Martin.
Take care, Hugh.